Yes, welcome everyone to the 19th annual partners meeting. So it's my job to give a bit of a progress update of what we've been doing in the programme thus far. I'm aware that we've got a few new people and new faces in the meeting today. We've spread the invite a little bit wider as it's virtual. So what I'm going to do is just give a little bit of a background of the history of the programme, how it's evolved and kind of what we do first. And then I'll update some more in the specifics of what data we're collecting and the kind of progress moving forward as well. So as Brian mentioned, the South East Regional Coastal Monitoring Programme was established in 2002 by Andy Bradbury. But actually, before that, there had been a variety of local and regional coastal monitoring programmes around the country. Before that, it was really Andy that formalised this into a particular structure. And since 2002, that's rolled out around the country, either establishing new regional monitoring programmes or bringing existing ones into the fold until 2011, when the national network of regional monitoring programmes started. So the national network has just started its third phase of monitoring. We run in 5 or 6 year phases. The Southeast programme, we've just entered our 5th phase of monitoring. So a nicely established programme at this point. In 2018, the Welsh Coastal Monitoring Centre was formed as well, and we've been in close collaboration with them as well. So we now have formal strategic coastal monitoring around all of England and Wales. Throughout this process, we've worked really closely with a wide range of coastal stakeholders to make sure that we can provide the type of data that they need to make their decisions. We're funded by DEFRA via the Environment Agency to support flood and coastal erosion risk management, but the data has many more applications than that and goes far and wide. You can see here the structure of the network as it stands. So there's 6 regional programmes, and they're all very closely aligned with the Coastal Group network. We collaborate very closely with them to make sure that we're collecting the type of data that they want. And the aim of the programme has always been to provide standardised, repeatable and cost-effective coastal monitoring around the coastline. To make sure that wherever you're working on the coast, you can be guaranteed that you're going to get a data set which is standardised and robust, but also comparable in both time and space to other areas around the country. So to do that, as well as working with the coastal groups, we work very closely with the risk management authorities, coastal managers, engineers, and the wider stakeholders that I mentioned on the first slide, to ensure that we're providing the right service to everyone. And because we're funded through the Environment Agency, through government funding, the data is all freely available through open access, and that includes all of the data that we've collected and any analysis and reports that we might do on that data as well. And we really do support DEFRA's statement that they made in their 25-year environment plan that good evidence is the cornerstone of effective policy making. The model that we use for collecting the data is a fairly simple source, pathway and receptor model. So the source in our cases is the drivers of coastal change. So we're talking generally about waves, tides, meteorological condition, the hydrodynamics. The pathway are the mechanisms through which that change happens, so erosion, accretion, flooding, and the receptors are the response that you might see at the coastline, so a change in the shoreline position or the beach volume, a change in the habitat, or some kind of damage due to a flood effect. And on the basis of this, we collaborate with our stakeholders to determine the specific parameters that are important to them for decision making. So, for example, with waves, some of the key ones are wave height, wave direction, wave period that they're interested in. And through these conversations, we've established 2 survey networks to provide the data. So the first one is the hydrodynamic data, which provides hydrodynamic data in real time. And I won't say much about that. Thomas is going to give an overview of that in his update later in this session. In terms of the response on the shoreline that we're seeing, we have a range of different survey types that we undertake at a range of different scales, locally and then more synoptically and regionally as well. The bit in the middle, the mechanisms, is something that because we're a strategic programme, we don't monitor those directly, but we do work very closely with research institutions and others that are investigating these kind of mechanisms, and we can also infer a lot of it from our understanding of the drivers and the responses as well. So it's not ignored, but it's something that we don't directly monitor ourselves. And this leads us with a suite of different data sets that we can make available to you as the end user. And that ranges from everything from the real-time wave and tide data to the regular topographic LiDAR surveys to more bespoke cliff surveys and incident surveys after something like a big storm has happened as well. To target the monitoring in the right place, what we do is we've split up the coastline into a number of survey units. And for each of these survey units, we've made an assessment of what the assets are at risk there, what the exposure to waves is, the risk of tidal flooding, the geomorphology, the erosion potential, existing defences that are there, and of course the shoreline management plan options. And that allows us to put a risk rating to each survey unit, which dictates the type of data collection and the frequency of data collection that we might carry out. So, for example, a survey unit with no assets at risk that isn't actively eroding and is a no active intervention zone, we might only visit that on the ground every 5 years, whereas something with significant number of houses at risk with a hold the line policy or a beach management policy, then we will go there on the ground every twice a year instead. And that's just again because we're a strategic programme, so we unfortunately can't measure everywhere at the same intensity. To make sure that we are providing a standard product, we use very strict specifications for the data collection. If they exist already, we use industry standard specifications. So a good example of this is our bathymetry collection. We use the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency specification for the Civil Hydrography Programme. It's a great spec. And it exists already. There are some cases where specifications don't exist or didn't exist already, for example, for the hydrodynamic network that we run. And in those cases, then we write our own as well. And the aim of this is to be completely transparent to the end users of the data and to anyone that we might be contracting to collect the data, of course. So you can see exactly what we've asked for when we've been collecting the data. And the same goes for the quality control of that data as well. So we have quality control guides for all of the data types that we collect, and we make those available on the website. It provides clarity for the data users over what we might have done to the data before they get it, and also clarity for the contractors that might be collecting the data on what we're going to be expecting to do with it. We do have an ethos more of flagging rather than removal of data. Because we're very aware that different users might consider data that we might consider suspect actually is a real kind of extreme value, for example. So a good example of this is the hydrodynamic data, where rather than removing any data that we think is suspect, we'll just flag it, and then it's up to the end user to make that final decision of whether or not they want to include that in their analysis. And we're always keen to explore new technology, new analysis techniques, and exchange knowledge with our partners and with wider stakeholders as well, to make sure that we're taking advantage of any new ways of collecting monitoring data that might be more efficient, might give us additional information, or might just give us more data that we can share with everyone. So that's a bit of a background of kind of who we are and how we've evolved and what the aims of the programme are. And now I want to give a bit of a roundup of some of those key data types and the progress that we've made over the last phase and plans going forward. So I'll start with the topographic survey. This is a lot of our bread and butter work within the team. And there were some There were some complications due to COVID on collecting some of this data during 2020. The good news is that we're now back on track, and we're now back into our normal schedule. As a reference for this, over phase 2, we've calculated that we collected approximately 40,000 topographic beach profiles in the southeast region, which of course is added on top of the phase 1 total as well. And one of the big wins this year is that we've finally been able to get out to Sandown. So the Sandown baseline that we normally carry out, unfortunately we couldn't do during COVID, because we weren't able to stay on the island, and we need to stay there for a few days to get there. So the images on the left there, you can see are images from that particular survey. So we're now all caught up with that. We've also made some improvements and changes to what we're doing. So we've updated the interim and the annual reports. You can find those on the website. We've also done a review of a lot of the master profiles along the coastline to make sure that they properly represent any movement of the beach, for example, any rollback that might not have been captured before. So we're continually reviewing the data and the methods there to make sure you're getting the best product. We also make use of UAVs. For some reason, the text isn't showing this, but we have a fixed wing UAV that we're using at the moment. That's a Sirius Pro fixed wing, and we use that with photogrammetry. And it was particularly useful during the COVID restrictions because it only needed a couple of people to go out on survey. So we made very good use of that. And we are also looking at alternatives. So the image you're looking at the moment was actually captured by a DJI M300. It's a rotor-based UAV, but it can operate in the same kind of conditions that we operate the fixed wing with. But the difference is that we can have additional payloads on this one. So we can actually put LiDAR data on this as well. So we're kind of trialing this. Some of our partners have this particular drone. And so we're having a look at their data and just making sure that it can meet the specifications that we need. And then we may well be expanding our UAV capabilities as we move forward. In terms of our airborne LiDAR, in phase 2, we captured just under 200 kilometers squared of data with the LiDAR. And this is something that was impacted by COVID in 2020. Flights were delayed, which means that the schedule was thrown off slightly. But we're back on schedule now. We capture LiDAR data during the winter months, so during October to March. The flights for this upcoming season should be beginning this month, where we're capturing the western half of the area, as well as Dungeness. So we split the area into two sides, western and eastern, and they get surveyed in alternate years. And then at Dungeness and Medmary, where there's significant change on an annual basis, they get surveyed yearly instead. So that capture hopefully is starting or might even be underway if we're lucky. The data that was captured in 2020-21 is being quality controlled at the moment. And the data that was captured in 2019 and 20 is just having its final checks before it's being uploaded. But should be available very soon. And then all things being well, we'll continue with this alternating pattern of west and then east as we move forward through the phase. The survey plans that I'm showing in this presentation, you can look at more closely via the website as well if you want to have a closer look at those. Our aerial photography, it is due for next year. So aerial photography is flown in the opposite season to the LiDAR. So this is flown between March and September. And this is to make sure that the vegetation is identifiable for the aerial photography, because that we'll then use it for habitat mapping moving forwards. During phase 2, we captured just under 4,000 kilometers squared of aerial photography. and that was captured in 2016 and then 2019, and it did spill over a little bit into 2020 because of some technical issues and then COVID restrictions. The contract for the work to be captured in 2022 has the tender process has just finished, so we're hoping that we will award that within the next month, and so we should have plenty of time to get ready for the capture of our next set of aerial photography. As I mentioned, we use that aerial photography to do habitat mapping. So again, this is a piece of work that we contract out to a specialist contractor to do. And this is some examples of data that have come from, been mapped from the data that was captured in 2019-20. So this is the most up-to-date habitat mapping we have. On the left, you'll see the Medway and Sheerness, and on the right, you'll see the Farlington marshes. This contract is progressing very well, so all of the mapping has been done now for the whole of the southeast region, and the contractors have started to move on to doing quantitative analysis to look at changes that have happened. We're hoping that we should have that by November, and that we should be able to make it available to everyone in the new year. Just a sneak preview though of some of the change. So I've just put up on the left hand side of the screen, this is the same image as you're seeing on the right. So this is Farlington Marshes, but it's been overlaid in pink with coastal salt marsh habitat that was captured in 2016. Sorry, 2013. And what you can see from the green here poking through is actually new salt marsh growth that's been occurring in this region. And our contractors are telling us that they have seen quite a lot of change in the coastal habitats around here. So I think it should be a very interesting report when we get it to look at what's been changing. The bathymetry data, I'm going to take a bit more of a national perspective on this. So during phase 2, we took almost 400 linear kilometres of swath bathymetry along the coastline. And our aim for the last couple of phases has really been to fill in a baseline of that white ribbon area, the very shallow water near shore that's very difficult to capture bathymetry data in. And we've done a lot of that in collaboration with the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, who allow us to extend their shallow water surveys into the very shallow near shore where possible. And we're doing really well on that. We're up to 69% coverage on that particular map. And the only outlying area in the southeast is the Western Solent. So that's our priority for this phase, and then we're going to be moving towards resurvey instead. So we've been doing some assessments of areas of change or high priority that we might want to go back and resurvey within this current phase. And again, you can find the survey plan on the website if you want to have a closer look. We've also identified some areas that we'd like to expand to should we have funds available in the programme. To aid with that, we've been investigating whether or not we can take swath bathymetry data internally within the programme. So we've been trialling an orbit sensor, and this is just an example from Milford-on-Sea. And here you can just see a short video of the live capture of this kind of data when we were doing these trials. So we've been trialing this to see whether it can give us the right kind of specification of data so that we can do some in-house surveying, which will bring the costs down for some of the resurvey that we do locally. Stuart McVeigh is just going to have a look at the data and check that it meets all our requirements before we invest in this. But we're hoping that very soon within this phase, we'll have the capability to do in-house swath bathymetry. In terms of our hydrodynamic network, so phase 2, we collected about 500,000 hours worth of wave data nationally, and you can see on the right here the evolution of the network of coastal wave buoys throughout the phases. The new additions in the southeast is the Rye wave buoy, has been deployed and is now on HF, which means it's giving us full 64-bit spectrum. Some of you may remember there used to be a buoy at Rye, which had to be taken out because of a number of events where it was cut adrift. But we are now much happier on our recovery and our communications with the local users there. And so we've reinstated it, and hopefully it will be there for a very long time to come. And then I have to make a quick happy birthday announcement. So our Milford-on-Sea buoy was deployed in 1996. So it's now 25 years old, this particular buoy. It's our longest running buoy. And what this actually means to us is that we are now starting to get data sets that are long enough that we might be able to start making predictions and understand trends that are happening on climate scales, as well as shorter scales as well. So it's a big milestone for us. And I will say it's not the same buoy. We do change it out regularly. But yes, 25 years there. And similar has happened with the Tide and Met station sites over the years. We've expanded out where we have these locations, depending on the needs of our users. And obviously, also we regularly update the network that we have. So the image you can see on the right here is Deal Pier. There were a lot of renovations that were going on to the pier itself. And so at the same time, took the opportunity to relay cables, refurbish the unit here and give it a real kind of spruce up so it can continue to provide us with great data. We do track people that come to our website to find the data. And so this is just an image of the number of website hits that we get every month. So we're averaging 6 million visits every month over the entire period that we've been logging this. So we get a lot of traffic through. We also log the downloads that people are making. So in phase 2, the total value of the data that was downloaded was £277 million worth. And that equates to almost 300,000 individual downloads of data sets or reports or analysis. So, I mean, it's great news and I think great evidence that people are using the data and are coming to the website to get it. And here you can see how that breaks down to different users of the data. So what you can see in the southeast is that we do get a lot of researchers and university students using the data. But also we get a lot of local authority, environment agency and consultancy use as well. And I would suggest that this probably underestimates the amount of use by local authority and the environment agency, because we also do supply data to them directly, which isn't logged in this particular graph. In terms of the most valuable data sets that we have, bathymetry and hydrodynamics are probably the ones that have the most value in terms of download, but we are seeing increases now in the number of people that are using some of the products from the data, so habitat mapping and seabed mapping, as well as we're making that more prominent and easier to get hold of. In terms of the research and development side of things, so I've already mentioned the UAV and the swath bathymetry that we're investigating. The other thread really that we've had over the last few years is looking into Earth observation data and whether there might be any benefit to using that kind of data to support the monitoring that we do. So we've been involved in a number of projects here. The Coastal Erosion from Space project was one that was run by Argans and the British Geological Society, looking at a range of different monitoring products that might be useful for us. And I've given updates for that in previous annual partners meetings, so please go and have a look at the recordings of that if you want to find out more. The Blueco project I'm not going to say anything about, but just stay tuned for session 2 and there'll be an update on that project within the second session. The SWAT project is looking at water levels in the Severn Estuary, using new techniques from satellites. And we've also had university students who've been looking at things like weather satellite derived bathymetry might be a suitable product for us. And there's more to come on this. There's a big push within the Earth observation community to show that there's real application of their data. And so we're more than happy for them to use us as a test case, and we can tell them whether or not we think some of this data is going to be good for you guys as well. And then lastly, we do try and make sure that the programme is well represented in national and wider projects as well. And there's two reasons for this. One is to make sure that they're aware of the programme and the data that we have, and they're using the data appropriately. And the second is to see if there's anything that we can learn from them in terms of upcoming changes that we might want to take under consideration, or whether they have anything that we can learn from them as well. So I won't go into detail about all of these, but we are technical advisors on the Shoreline Management Plan refresh and the National Coastal Erosion Risk Mapping projects. We were closely involved with the National Flood Risk Assessment work that's been carried on, supplying information about assets and collating information about assets for that. We were heavily involved in the Geospatial Commission work on coastal zone mapping. So this was an exercise which really dug into the bones of who is doing what in the coastal zone in terms of geospatial mapping, what everyone's remits were, and what the potential for collaboration might be. And then there's also a current DEFRA-funded project on coastal monitoring and historical coastal change, which we're involved in as well, just to feed in our data, but also to learn more about what they think their requirements might be for monitoring into the future. So that's not all of the kind of representation work we do, but we do try and make sure that everyone is aware of what we're up to. So thank you very much. I'll end it there, and I'll hand over to Sam Pitman, who's going to give an update on the website side of things and how you actually get hold of some of the data. But thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Pitman, and I'm the GIS analyst at CCO. I'm going to briefly give you an update on how the website has changed over the last year. Oh, one sec. So the first change you'll probably notice if you load up the website is that the national branding is now in place. So as the website serves the national network rather than just the Southeast, the logo in the top left has been updated to a national logo, which you can see there in white. And if you're on the home page, you can see the national logo in its full color glory in the bottom there. There you go. So the next change that you'll probably not notice, but should hopefully improve user experience for everyone, is that the download limit has increased. For the last few years, it's been 5 gigabytes, and we've had a few people contact us about how this is a bit too low for when they're trying to download large data sets or multiple data sets simultaneously. So with the new infrastructure at the back end of the website, we've managed to increase this to 10 gigabytes. So hopefully when downloading those large data sets, you won't have to use quite as many batches, and it should hopefully streamline the process for you. As you'll have seen in Charlie's previous slides, we log the downloads on the website. However, due to a recent change in the way that reports have been downloaded from the website, we were seeing a massive uptick in the reports, the green downloads in the last 4 quarters. So yeah, this is due to the fact that you can now download reports with one click rather than having to go through a whole download process. But yeah, we realized that some of this log was actually not real humans, and it was bots and crawlers from search engines and things similar to that. So we've created a new way of filtering these logs, and we're confident that this uplift is actually real users of the reports. So this change to the download method has actually been successful, and more people are accessing our reports. So the next thing I'm going to briefly update you all about is that we're having a couple of format changes. So both the aerial photography and the LiDAR data available from our website are going to be changing to different formats. So the LiDAR data is going to be changing to GeoTIFFs, and the aerial photography is going to be changing to JPEG 2. These are both widely used formats, so shouldn't cause any issues at your end. But if you do have any issues or any questions about these format changes, we have some guides available. So just send an email over and I will send one of these out to you, and it should help. All the previous data that's already on the website is going to remain in the format that it's already in. So if you're using that data, you won't have to change anything. We've also got a number of changes to the real-time pages that I'm going to talk about. So the first one of these is that on the home page for the real-time data, we have got some new links to make navigating a bit easier. So at the top of the map, you can see that there's a new link to waves, tides, MET, and GPS data. By clicking on this, it will take you directly to where you want to go rather than having to scroll all the way down every time you want to go to a specific data type. We've also got some improvements to the graphing. Graphs showing more than a day now show the year as part of the date, as you can see here. This means that if for any reason you've got a historic graph saved in a report or something similar, you'll have the date for context, so there's no potential for confusion. At tide gauge sites, you can now see predictions into the future. The default landing page now shows a graph of 48 hours of measured data, followed by a 12-hour period after the latest data point has been measured. This should provide the user with a better first impression of the tide in context and allow them to visually appreciate the timings of the next low and high water. As the MET stations are primarily deployed to provide context to the observations at tide gauges, the same changes have been made to these graphs, allowing easy comparison between the two. So yeah, on the web pages for these, you can just tab between these graphs and they'll be on the same. Easy comparison. For the MET stations, this has the added benefit of making slow changing parameters such as the barometric pressure easier to read over the 48-hour period. Acting on an idea from the newly appointed Deputy for the Southwest Region's Hydrodynamic Network, Isabel Kelly, tide tables have been developed by the CTO and Geodata. So the tide tables can be found under the tide graph at each site, and they show the two highs and low waters for the current day, well, yesterday, because that's when I took this screenshot, followed by the next 5 days. The values are provided in reference to CD or OD, depending on the datum selected by the user at the top of the graph. So the graph and the table will show the same data, and a link has also been added to the top of each of those tide pages, so you can easily navigate down to the tide tables below without having to scroll again. We also have some exciting changes up in the works. The first is that we're looking at adding more 3D data to our website. So we have a number of point clouds which aren't currently on the website, and with the infrastructure changes, it's been made possible that we're going to upload these in the future, and we're looking at a way of visualizing these on the website. So you'll have a 3D viewer in the website itself. So even users that don't necessarily have access to 3D visualization software on their own computers, they'll be able to have a look at this website, at this data on the website. We're also looking at introducing a new data type on the website for the cliff survey data that we have, because currently there's no specific download for cliff data on our data page. So yeah, we've got some surveys in the works for the Southwest at the moment, but going forward we'll have everything in place for uploading cliff surveys from the Southeast as well. The other project that we've got in the works is a beach profile viewer. So currently when downloading topographic beach profiles, you'll just see each survey individually. You'll have to download the data to be able to visualize it. We're looking into including the individual profiles so you can visualize where those all are on a map. And then by clicking on each of those profiles, you'll bring up a profile graph so you can look at the profiles and see that you're downloading the data that you actually want before necessarily downloading a whole survey when you realize it's not the one you were after. As always, I'd encourage you to follow us on Twitter if you're interested in keeping up to date with what we're up to. We are at Channel Coast, and we're easy to find if you just type in Channel Coastal Observatory to the search bar on Twitter. Yeah, so we provide lots of updates there. And I'd also encourage you to sign up to our newsletter if you've not already. You can sign up using this link or by scanning that QR code if you have a smartphone. yeah, and we provide quarterly updates here, a bit more in depth than anything we post on Twitter. And yeah, it's the best way to keep up to date with what we're doing every quarter. If you have any questions about what I've said here or anything to do with the website, feel free to get in touch with me. My website's there, and you can also reach me through the generic CCO email at cco@channelcoast.org. If you have any feedback on the website, I'd encourage you to touch the feedback button at the bottom of the webpage. And yeah, that will come straight through to me and the website team, and we can have a look there. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone enjoys Thomas's update on the Hydrodynamics network next. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas, and I manage the hydrodynamic network at the CCO. Like Charlie said, I've been told that there are some new faces here today. So I'll start with a couple of slides introducing the hydrodynamic network on a national scale. The national network comprises 70 instruments, 37 wave buoys, 14 tide gauges, and 19 meteorological stations. The median time series length from our wave data is 14 years, but as Charlie mentioned, we do have individual sites that go much further than that. Milford, for example, as Charlie said, has 25 years of data, and in the southeast, we have about 20 years of data almost at most of our wave buoys. For our tide data as well, our median time series length is 14 years, but again, we have individual sites where our time series extend well beyond 20 years. The median time series length of our MET data is about 12 years. All of the wave buoys that we have deployed along the English coastlines are Datawell's Directional Wave Rider Mark III, which you can see in the top right corner of that slide. That is the industry standard. The wave buoy network is primarily deployed to provide real-time data for flood forecasting, warning, and beach operations, to provide statistics for coastal and marine planning projects, to provide operational assistance in coastal construction projects, to monitor coastal processes such as beach erosion and transport, and to validate coastal wave and sediment dynamics models, especially in those nearshore areas where modeling is still tricky. We are very much a nearshore coastal wave buoy network where the majority of our wave buoys are deployed on the 10-meter chart datum line. We have a variety of instruments that provide water level observations. One of those is the Rosemount Wave Radar Rex, which is pictured on the top right of the screen. We very much try to complement the national tide gauge network and do not try to duplicate any tide gauge locations. Instead, we try to provide sea level records in areas where coastal and flood erosion are threats and where other records are unavailable. In other words, areas that are currently underserved by the national tide gauge network. All of our tide gauges, or at least the majority of them, are also accompanied by a MET station. That is so that the water level observations that we provide can also be placed into their proper meteorological context. The majority of our MET stations are now Vaisala's WST536 device, which is an integrated MET station, which you can see on the top right of this slide, which means that all of its sensors are housed in one housing, and it provides wind speed, direction, barometric pressure, temperature, rain, and humidity. Again, like I said before, the main purpose of our MET stations is to provide that contextual meteorological data for water level observations at our tide gauges, but individual MET stations also serve various local strategic purposes. For example, at Brighton, we collect rainfall data, do a monthly bit of analysis for the local engineers there, where it is thought that rainfall correlates with cliff falls. The way that we deliver the data to our users is threefold. First of all, we provide real-time data on the website, which you've just seen in Sam's presentation as well. We do that in graphic format and in tabulated format. You can also access our data through our API, which you can put a request in for. Via our API, you can pull in all of the latest observations from all of our instrumentation, or you can ask for a historic point in time. So you can ask for a particular value from a particular site at a particular date and time. And then we also provide monthly quality controlled archived data for the wave, tide, and MET data sets. Okay, moving on to the update over the last year. What I've done here, just to give you an impression of the quality of the data we are currently collecting out of our instruments, is provide you with the 2021 recovery rates so far for our wave buoys. So if I activate a pointer here, these are all of our wave buoy sites, at least the names of them, the months of the year so far, and on the right I've provided an average of the recovery rates of data being collected from that instrument so far. What we consider a good recovery rate is over or equal 95% full data recovery for a particular year. And you can see we are meeting that comfortably at all of our wave buoy sites, with the exception of Pevensey Bay at the moment, and that's due to an adrift event in January, which I will come back to later on in this slideshow. The same principle for the tide gauges. So the tide gauges are listed here. The average recovery here, again, for most sites is comfortably above 95%, with a few exceptions. Deal Pier, as mentioned by Charlie before, Deal Pier has incurred some problems, but has undergone a rejuvenation project, which I'll come back to, and since then has been providing very good data. Same sort of situation at Swanage Pier, where you had a long-standing issue with the data cabling running along the pier. That was rejuvenated in March and is now providing great quality data. The two lower numbers here at Arran Platform and Sandown Pier were due to transmission issues, nothing to do with the actual instrumentation itself. Those appear to have been resolved, so we're hopeful that for October and moving forwards, we will have very high recovery rates again from those instruments as well. Finally, our meteorological stations, the picture is very much the same as our tide gauges, because they are, most of them, sitting with our tide gauges. At Folkestone, we had a long-term outage that was resolved in February, and since then we've had full recovery rates from that site. The same transmission issues that plagued the tide gauges also plagued the met stations at Arran Platform and Sandown Pier. Same situation at Swanage Pier. We had a long-term outage that was rectified in March, and now we're providing really good data. Similar to the met station at Portland Bill in Weymouth, where the site was revamped in June and is now providing excellent data again. Okay, we should touch wood, but we've only really had one true adrift event over the last 12 months, which was the Pevensey Bay wave buoy that went adrift on the 8th of January at 5:30 in the morning, but was recovered the same day at 12:30 by the vessel Sea Lift III. That buoy was redeployed on the 26th of January 2021. The reason for the adrift event was a lacerated bungee, which is part of the mooring that holds the wave buoy in place. It was most likely hit by a propeller, as you can see some marks on the rubber bungee here, leaving only a little bit here attached, and with any sort of force pulling on that bungee, it was eventually pulled apart. Okay. So we've had recurring problems at Swanage Pier, which was the initiative behind rejuvenating the entire site. The problem was that the data cable that runs from the instrument itself down the pier to the shore station was continuously damaged on a recurring rate, really, due to a combination of weather events, but also vandalism at the site. So to resolve that, instead, the shore station is now completely housed in this metal cabinet that sits beside the wave radar Rex. Inside that cabinet, a rail computer is now installed here, which is called a MOXA, which has an integrated 4G communication system. And a 4G antenna was also mounted by the meteorological sensor, which sits on a pole besides the tide gauge. So that means that all data communication from Swanage Pier now happens through 4G, so we are avoiding any sort of issues or interference with data cables running along the pier itself. And as Charlie mentioned as well, the wave radar Rex itself was refurbished by Ars Aqua and reinstalled at the site. So hopefully we're good again for another 10 to 15 years at Swanage Pier. Similar situation at Deal Pier. The problem there is fairly obvious from that picture. We had very outdated cabling at Deal Pier, which eventually got damaged during bad weather events. To resolve that, new power and data cabling was installed. This is the data cabling that now runs underneath the floorboards of the pier at Deal. Similarly, the cables then run up into the frame that holds up the wave radar Rex. This is the Rex itself. You can see it down here. And the Rex itself, again, was refurbished by Ars Aqua, reinstalled at the site, and hopefully we should be good again for another 10 to 15 years at that location. As Charlie mentioned as well, we have a new deployment of a wave buoy at Rye Bay, which is situated here in front of Rye, really, and Winchelsea, in between Fairlight and Dungeness. And we also established a shore station at the Rye Bay Harbour Master's office. So this is a wave buoy funded by the Environment Agency and is part of the Lid Rangers scheme. The buoy was first deployed on the 26th of February 2021, during a time when there were quite a few COVID restrictions still in place, which prevented our contractor from actually establishing the shore station at the same time at Rye Harbour. So we deployed the buoy as soon as we received it anyway, and had communications run via Iridium. Iridium is a satellite communication system where data is provided very much along the same lines as you would receive data on your phone, for example. By the 14th of July 2021, enough restrictions had been lifted that our contractor could install the HF shore station at the Rye Bay Harbour Master's office. And since then, the wave buoy has been providing data via the radio signal, which means that we can transmit a larger data package, which means we are now receiving the full 64-bin data well wave spectrum. In fact, this deployment is not entirely new. It is a redeployment of a previous wave buoy that was deployed there between August 2008 and April 2013, but we have tried to make some improvements over that previous deployment to avoid some of the issues that Charlie mentioned before. One of those is a surface marker buoy, which you can see here. It's looking a bit sad lying on its side, but since then weight has been added to the bottom of it and has a light on top, so it is much more visible, as you would appreciate in that picture here. And we've enabled the buoy with Iridium Communications, which, as I said, is a satellite communication system, which allows us, if the HF shore station goes down, we can switch on Iridium. Data will still be coming in. It'll be in a slightly different format, but the user themselves should not notice any real difference. Similarly, if the wave buoy should go adrift and drift outside of the radio signal, then we can turn on the Iridium communication and we can track the wave buoy via satellite. Something that I've talked about last year, I think, is that we have updated our methodology for producing joint return period plots and for doing multivariate extremes analysis in general. We've now rolled that out across all of our annual wave reports, which I produce for all of the wave buoy sites for the entire national network. All of our incident reports, so these are the post-storm reports that are produced at the request of local authority engineers, and then any sort of met-ocean analysis that we provide as well. The method is now a bivariate copula function that was developed in-house, and a first application of that in sort of a more research type context will be published in Anthropocene Coast's open access very soon. The actual application is basically using two new parameters to monitor swell in the channel. Okay, looking forward, what I'm hoping to be able to tell you in 12 months' time is that we have added some additional GPS devices on certain of our wave buoys to aid tracking during drift events, so we can pick up and redeploy wave buoys even quicker, and we can minimize any sort of data loss or data outage. We are looking at adding the wave parameters energy period TE and wave power P, particular to monitor swells to the real-time data pages. And the rationale for that and the research that sits behind that essentially will be published in that same paper that I've mentioned before in Anthropocene Coast, which will be available open access very soon. We're also looking at making available an additional archived file, which will not be quality controlled, but which will contain about 30 additional wave parameters. And that will be accompanied by a handbook explaining what exactly the user is looking at in terms of all of those additional wave parameters. We're also looking at expanding our API documentation. There is a new dashboard in development, both for our shore station and shore station providers, I guess you could call them, and our website users. That will allow you to basically plot certain parameters and graphs from the sites that you are most interested in one single page. And you can, for example, if you're very keen, set up a monitor in your house, and you can monitor those particular values and graphs at all times. Finally, we have also updated our datum control procedures for our tide gauges. And from the next couple of weeks, we will be starting a campaign to re-level all of our tide gauges and to re-establish our tide gauge benchmarks around the English coastline. That's it for the hydrodynamics. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now or later. Feel free to drop me an email at any time as well. My email address is thomas.dhoop@noc.ac.uk, or give me a call as well on my work mobile.
Thank you, Charlie, Thomas and Sam. Once again, I'm left astounded at the amount of work that you're doing, and those errant wave boys that you've got as well going awry. I'm not going to ask everybody to sing happy birthday to the Milford wave boy. I think that's probably going just a little bit too far, but it is nice to see that one in. I've just got a few things to say, but I've got a couple of questions that have come up in the chat from Uwe, and I'll invite him to ask Sam and Thomas in a minute those questions. Although, Sam, I think you've already answered one, but it will be a good idea just to do that. I'm eating a little bit into the break, but I think it's worthwhile doing. I have been asked just to remind, just to let you know that the morning session 1 after this break will terminate, and you have to log back in onto the morning session 2 on Teams. So there is a little bit of work that you'll need to be doing at the end of the break, but we will be restarting at 11 o'clock. So, Uwe, would you like to ask the 2 questions of Sam and Thomas?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Well, Sam answered the question, so I don't have to go into that one. And for Thomas, it was probably more a question in terms of organizational aspect of things. With the kelp in West Sussex sort of hopefully growing at some point, and the contention that kelp reduces wave action on the landward side of the kelp bed. Would it be the CCO's role, maybe not necessarily a funding point of view, it needs to come from somewhere else probably, but to coordinate the installation of some very near-shore wave recorders as soon as possible, basically, to capture the situation and validate sort of wave transformations without kelp, and then as the kelp bed grows. And I was thinking about sort of wave rexes on the 3 piers that we have in West Sussex.
I think the answer is pretty straightforward, Uwe. If funding is available and there is a need for that, then I'm sure we'd be very keen to install wave radar rexes at those locations. That has been made a little bit easier as well now, because there is a new generation of wave radar rex that has come out just before COVID, essentially. So there hasn't been that many installations, which has a number of advantages over the instrument that we currently have deployed. It's as robust, essentially. The wave measuring is about the same, but logistics of installing them have become much easier. They're much smaller. They have a much smaller power draw, which means we're no longer dependent on mains power, and we can install them with solar panels. So yeah, if there is funding and a need, then we are very keen to do so.
Thank you, Thomas. On that one, Uwe, I think it's something that the Coastal Group will maybe need to pick up. So I'll pick that up with Lyle to see whether we can maybe apply pressure or ask the same questions on the up and coming summit they've got on kelp in Shoreham in I think it's a few weeks' time. So that's probably the time to raise that and ask them what they're doing so that we can take it a little bit further forward. With that, I think if Sam, if you're happy with the response from Sam in the chat, that's fine. And with that, I think I can end session 2 unless something. I've just been told by Tim Bartlett the kelp summit is on the 17th of November, so we can do something at that and ask there. But other than that, I think we can terminate session 1. And as I said earlier, if you reconvene, we'll continue for 11 o'clock. If you could get back online before 11, it will be helpful so that we won't wait, but so that we won't have to wait for everyone coming on. But we will try and get in and actually started bang on time. So I'd like to thank the speakers for this morning and your indulgence with us so far. And I'll see you in the next session. Thanks very much.